Hello, this is our rebuttal video in which we will defend our position that Edward Snowden was a legitimate whistleblower. So your first point appears to be accusing Snowden of bad conduct. You stated that Snowden stole an employee's password to download documents, then immediately gave the documents to news. To answer this point, first of all, the situation was more nuanced. Perhaps his colleague felt coerced into incriminating Snowden. I can't imagine that taking his defense would have ended well. Additionally, Snowden tried other things. First, he attempted to, quote, share his misgivings with his bosses. However, they ignored him. What could he do? Write a letter to his congressional representative or perhaps President Obama himself? The New York Times has concluded that Mr. Snowden was clearly justified in believing that the only way to blow the whistle on this kind of intelligence gathering was to expose it to the public. Personally, we believe that this outcome was to be expected. After all, internal government auditing had failed to address this problem for many years. Now, regardless of what his practices in revealing the information were, if it is true that the surveillance practices were unethical, then surely it must be of benefit for the public to know through the means of a whistleblower rather than disclosure from the government, which may not contain the full truth. Another argument you bring up twice is the amount of unnecessary or unrelated files that were leaked. Well, for us to believe this claim, there should exist evidence of that if they were released to the public, and yet you provided no such evidence. To answer your second main point, that Snowden caused damage to international operations. First, our sources confirm that the NSA surveillance in question was located in countries allied with the US. The top officials in those countries most likely were aware of it to some extent. The NSA had data centers and servers installed in some of these countries. Their governments received computer equipment made in America, a country that is the enemy of the United States, that is the subject of spy operations, would not have so easily allowed these things. Also, the USA's deep involvement in these countries is the very reason why Snowden couldn't stay in those countries and was ultimately led to Russia. To answer your final point, where you claim that Snowden refused to clear his name in America and chose to stay in Russia. This was not a choice. He couldn't clear his name because the US wouldn't offer him a fair trial. Snowden requested this, including via an interview on CBS News. However, the doctrine around whistleblowing at the time and the Espionage Act, which he was being prosecuted under, made it so that if he returned to the US, he'd be immediately put into prison and subject to recording at all times, including conversations with attorneys, giving the prosecution a significant advantage by knowing the arguments he would make ahead of time. So in conclusion, we assert that Snowden's actions were well-intentioned and entirely necessary. He tried to minimize the amount of damage caused by his actions, and so we consider him a legitimate whistleblower.